get started. Welcome to Reclaiming the Narrative, Trans and Gender Bending Stories in the Future of Trans Filmmaking. My name is Jordan Gonzalez. Woo, give it up for everybody. My name is Jordan Gonzalez, and joining me today are these three amazing human beings. Can y'all please introduce yourselves and what you do in the industry space?
I'm Nico, Carney. I play Alex in She's the He, which is why we're all here, premiering at South by Southwest right now, and I'm also a stand-up comedian, actor, writer. Woo.
Hi, I'm Misha, Osherovich. I'm also an actor in She's the He, and that's all I have to share with you right now.
I'm Siobhan McCarthy. I'm a cinematographer and a director. I directed She's the He with these two lovely people, and I've just been an out trans person in the industry for a while now.
Woo! Woo! Woo woo. Alright, let's jump into it. Alright, so the concept of gender swapping in film is a history that predates modern discussions about representation, right? So present even within Shakespeare. How did that affect the movie y'all set out to make, if at all? And Misha, I know that you're classically trained in Shakespeare. Can you expand on that?
I am classically trained in Shakespeare, thank you. Also, I have notes because I'm a nervous human being, so we have our phones. But no, I mean, the film absolutely does a gender swapping story, but to the nth degree, because we have trans actors playing cis roles. We really kind of push every single boundary, as Shakespeare did, because gender swapping stories have been around forever and always been fascinating to humanity. No, I actually, even more so than the gender swapping story, I really appreciated how the way that Shiv cast the film is we have trans actors playing cis roles and all over the spectrum, non-binary, trans, indiscriminately, because that's how the industry should be run. But no, I really dug that we did that with the film, and that we really dug into just how strange, weird, awesome, terrifying gender bending can be, and I think it also lent itself to the comedy of the film a lot. So yeah.
Nico, do you want to speak about playing a cis character on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very cool opportunity for me. Obviously, like Misha said, it's not every day that, people are looking to cast trans actors in cis roles, so it was a very cool opportunity to get to do that. And I also think in our film in particular, because of the nature of what we were discussing and dealing with and these themes, we had the ability to go there a little bit more with some of the comedy that comes from this dumb 17-year-old cis boy because a trans actor is playing it. So there was a bit of safety and understanding that all of this was going to be done with a general understanding amongst all of us of what these things actually mean and how it can actually have social impacts outside of the film, which is something that if you have a cis actor playing this, maybe you don't get. Love and light to our best cis allies out there, but even the best maybe don't fully get it anyway. So but it was a really cool opportunity for me also as an actor to just get to showcase that me and many all other trans actors have it in them to do that, because it's no different than allowing cis actors to play other roles that they don't exactly line up with in real life.
What do you mean?
We're the same.
Exactly, and I don't know if any of this resonates with anyone else, but whenever I play a cis character, particularly because I wasn't out in high school, I grew up in Georgia, went to Catholic school and wasn't out, it was a really fun way to relive that part of my life in a way that I wasn't able to. And so I don't know if that resonates with anyone else as well.
I mean, this movie is also a high school movie, and I don't know, it gets so deep into what we wish we did or didn't have in high school, but it was bizarre to see just the amount of play, especially Nico is extremely funny and it's kind of annoying sometimes, but the amount of play that happens when you've gone through a good amount of your transition, your gender journey, and you just discovered yourself a bit more as an adult, and all of a sudden the freedom that a lot of high school teenagers have, which is where a lot of that bombastic high school humor in the best high school movies come from, all of a sudden we're capable of it because we're actually ourselves and not so rigid and just hiding from the world and begging the world to get through high school unscathed. So that, I think, definitely was an amazing part of the movie.
Well, I will also say that in making movies, a lot of the time you're crafting the future that kids grow into, and so we've had generations of kids watching high school movies, sometimes problematically when they're seeing 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds playing high schoolers and pre-setting what that future or what their lives could look like. And also all of the time those are always cis people, a lot of the time they're straight people, and it doesn't really open up a dialogue or a narrative that feels accessible, I think, for a lot of queer people, or really anyone who's not represented by like traditional film media. And so anytime that any of us can get in there and create stories, especially about young people, it does create a narrative that allows kids to grow into something, even if they're not out in high school, even if you don't know who you are in high school. It at least opens something up instead of having to like look to niche work. And I think that that was like an incredible opportunity on this film, but in general, I think that cinema needs to move towards opening up these tropes or these traditional modes of storytelling to include other people that aren't traditionally in the oppressor's role in society.
Absolutely, and I think that is a great segue into the next question, which is additionally to classic movies and theater, this trope seems to have gotten a lot of steam and cultural power in the late 90s and early 2000s. Your film seems heavily influenced by that era. Can you tell us what inspired you to subvert those, late 90s, early 2000s films with She's the He?
I mean, yeah, it's much of the same thing. I think that anyone who's young grew up on movies like Clueless and She's the Man. Like, that was so much of our childhood, and it's tough when you're looking at those movies and you love them and there's pieces of them that are really resonating with you and you can pick something out of them. But you have to do work to dissect what is inside of that piece that is speaking to you. I just felt like as a trans kid, obviously when I was young, I didn't know, but like by the time I was getting into high school, I was starting to notice something fell off and something didn't exist. So when I was now going back to write this movie, and then I think just as all of us engage, like Misha was saying, with our past and with what our youth could have been or what our youth could have looked like, it's hard to not, at least for me, think about what media shaped my youth and like what media shaped my teenagerhood and how I could take that and relitigate that for who I am now. And I think that that is one of the things that is interesting if you are being oppressed by society, especially if you can reach a point of self-acceptance or if you can reach a point of self-knowledge later in life, which shouldn't be what we have to do, but for a lot of us, that is what ends up having to happen in order for us to live ourselves truly and fully. Once you are in that position, it is interesting to go back to these youthful concepts and these youthful movies so that with an adult's perspective, we can relitigate our own childhoods, but also potentially relitigate the childhoods of many more people who will consume these movies. I mean, I definitely set out with this movie to make something that could speak to everyone, but more than anything, I think that this movie, and I think a lot more work in cinema in general, can take these things that we grew up or take these things that we're used to and expand the bubble of who gets to watch them. Instead of excluding a new group, we can just take that and bring ourselves into it, whoever ourselves may be, specifically for this movie, trans people.
Yeah, and I think She's the He does a wonderful job of doing that, specifically with Alex's character, Nico, who Nico plays, is I think a lot of these cis bros can relate with him very, very well, and maybe might not know that Nico is trans. And then we can sit across from them and have that conversation of, hey, we're not much different than you are, and that opens up the dialogue for acceptance instead of excluding, which I think is done really well. Anybody else want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think on the point you just made there about like my character Alex being this, like, I don't know, I find that like in reflecting on the movie a lot, and I don't know to what extent I was intentionally thinking about this when it was happening, but I was, as we've been talking about it in press and reflecting on it, like my character also goes through a journey with his gender, and I won't, spoil anything about the film, but basically, he kind of understands growing up into his manhood in a way, and I think that that's something that cis people kind of forget, or in certain ways are not lucky enough to understand in a way that we are, because we all have to deal with what it means to become ourselves when you come out as trans, and you have to deal with that. And so I think there's also a lot of like, young people, regardless of their gender expression or identity, who don't realize they're also going through kind of a similar thing, just like not in the same sort of, politicized way and not under the same kind of microscope that we're under. But I think that there's a lot of anxiety for people not understanding who it is that they're expected to be or what that looks like. And so it was cool too to get to be like, all right, I'm also playing a character that in a much less, straightforward way, or not as much what the movie's really about, but is also going through this gender journey. And I think that's something that like I would hope that, even if not explicitly, but somewhere in their subconscious as people take away from this movie, that like that's probably why they're interacting with my character in the way that they are, and they're being seen and understood by my characters, because what's actually happening is they're experiencing again what they really did do in high school, which was or at some point in their life figure out what it is to be a man, to be a woman, to be a person, and what that looks like for them. So I hope that like the way that they see themselves in me doesn't just land on the dick jokes and goes a little bit deeper.
No, I think that's right on the nose. Y'all are telling a trans coming of age story through comedy, which in my opinion is new, needed, and refreshing. You know, our stories don't always have to be of self-hatred and harm and sadness. And can you speak to the comedic tone of the film and how y'all landed on the tone for that movie while still weaving in the emotion and the heartfelt beats?
I mean, you know, initially upon writing this movie, it is kind of ridiculous. Like, the movie is playing out like a conservative nightmare, essentially, in real time, and treating it as if it was a genuine thing that someone could think about. And it is hard because, like, a lot of that has so much violence that it directly drives into our community. Like, so many of these talking points are inherently violent against who we are. And it is tough, I think, to acknowledge those things or to come back at those things with humor and with a smile on your face when it feels like someone is actively trying to kill you. But in my experience in this world, so much of the time, people who are not willing to engage in a conversation or are fearful to engage in a conversation, a lot of the time it's because they are angry or because they're coming at us with hate. And I think if you can find a way to make someone laugh, even laugh at something that they might be uncomfortable with, it opens them up just a little bit more to being willing to accept that idea. I mean, it is back to the you playing as this guy and people relating to you thing. I mean, that's so much of, I think, what is interesting about this piece, and I also, the precedent that I hope that we can set with this movie, is that by bringing people into these spaces, and by especially bringing people into comedy, we can open up who feels like they get to have a dialogue about this, or even who gets to access things. Because everyone does want to laugh. I think most people like to engage with comedy as a medium in general. And I know, especially for my parents or people who want to support the community, but might not feel like they have the language to engage with that, sometimes it is easiest to give them the spoonful of sugar to start, to just give them the beginning of the idea of how to engage with or how to talk about these things. And I think that a lot of the time, comedy just feels less daunting for people, especially people who don't know how to talk about something. I mean, I feel like, Nico, you have so much to say about this too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, like I mentioned up top, I'm a stand-up comedian as well, and you know, a lot of my act, I talk about being a trans man, and it's definitely been a cool experience to witness people in real time, like, start to understand what that means, and you know, like, by the end of it, be like, huh, that was kind of awesome. I kind of like that guy, which is a really cool thing to be able to do, and I agree with Shiv wholeheartedly. I think that comedy is like such a way to break down those conversations and to start to get people to think about those things, and you know, to have it in the safety of a comedy club or a movie theater or something that isn't, you know, gonna ask them to like recite everybody's pronouns back or something and they get all nervous or whatever, you know what I mean? They just like, I think it like helps to do that, but especially right now, like I think, I don't know, obviously there's a lot of comedy, and especially coming from the stand-up world, there's a lot of stand-up that's, you know, antagonistic towards trans people and using us as a punchline, and so, you know, obviously it's something that people are curious about and something that's on the cultural conversation right now, so it feels really powerful and cool to get to bring in an actual perspective on it, and I think that's something that this film does really well as well. Like, you know, like Shiv said, we're taking those conservative talking points, we're taking the exact language and dialogue that they're using, and we're turning it on its head in a way that's, I think, gonna surprise a lot of people, which is another powerful thing about comedy. It has the power to surprise and, you know, subvert your expectations.
And Misha, if you'd like to share the heartfelt of it all, what that was like for you playing a character who is actively transitioning on screen while using comedy as a medium, but still finding the heart through that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm the straight they, she in this movie. Like, Nico is the joke machine, and that's very intentional in the writing, but it became very apparent on set. Like, I'm responding to a lot of the comedy around me, which is also, I mean, this character is transitioning on screen, and I had to conversely detransition to play this character for the first half of the movie, and I didn't expect that that would make me miserable. I didn't fully comprehend that how powerful dysphoria runs, and I've lived a lot of my life doing sort of like the most all the time type A, I can do anything, and not really considering my mental health. And not to say that I had a miserable time on this set, because I didn't, because when I was crying, or when I was, whether it's on screen or in my trailer, the
The classroom.
the classroom, the empty classroom, at the school we were filming at. I would look around and I would see a majority trans and queer crew and cast, and I saw the final product, you know, first the rough cut, and even sometimes I would watch scenes back, like the version of Dailies, and certainly watching it with an audience here at the premiere at South by. It's a joyful movie. It's a really funny movie, and it was really gratifying for me to have this moment of, oh sure, it's very difficult being a trans femme, being a trans anybody, but the way to not cure that, but the way to help that, the way to move that to the forefront of society, the way to make it easier to be a trans person, is one of the most powerful ways is comedy and joy. And I think the joy part is what really shocked me on set. It was what got me through shooting this movie, and it certainly what just so loudly resonated clearly with the audience at our premiere the other day was just everybody having a really good time hanging out with trans people, watching trans people discover joy on screen in both a meta way as trans actors, but also as these trans characters. And all of a sudden, we're human beings, we're fully fleshed out, we're interesting, we laugh, we cry, all those things. So I was very grateful for the joy that this film sort of injected into me and the world, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to touch on, is that the majority of the cast and crew was 90% trans,
Something around there.
all queer, which is an incredible feat to have a film made like that, and then to have it premiere at South by. So I think we should take a moment to celebrate that. Which does segue into my next question. How does that feel to have made this film and finally have it out into the world for young queer people to see themselves in a coming-of-age story that also allows people to, who are within and outside of our community, to laugh along with us as these high schoolers find themselves in the same way other peers their age do?
I mean, I think that it is, again, just like to talk to the future of trans cinema thing. It does feel very meaningful to get to have had this in this medium. But also, you know, I think we all hope we can set a precedent that in order to make art, especially art that can get into more mainstream spaces, you don't necessarily have to sacrifice your own morals or your own values. I mean, it was incredibly difficult to build a crew and build a cast and build out every single person on this set, especially really hyperfixating on making sure that the majority of those people were trans. That was incredibly difficult, but I mean, I hope it comes through in the piece, and I hope it also can start to set that standard for speaking about marginalized experiences, an idea that you do not just have to put one person in front of the camera who the audience can see and who everyone can see on PR level that's going to make the movie look like it did enough. Like, those conversations do go deeper than just what an audience sees, and I think you can feel that through on the screen too, when you can just tell that that space that people were in was safer for them or allowed for better conversations. I don't know, I mean, it's like, it does feel very special to have made this movie, and I feel really lucky we even got to do it in the first place, and I was able to find the people to do it in the first place. But more than that, I really do hope it sets a standard, or at least inspires a new generation or a new group of people to be unflinching in what they believe, and specifically their morals, because your morals can run much deeper than just the optics of the movie you're making. It should go through how you treat every single person on that set and who every single person you put on that set is, honestly.
Unfortunately, I started my transition in earnest after I became a loosely public-facing figure. This is my first trans femme role, and I went through the machine of becoming a person that does press and is on a set as a boy, and then as a they, them, who are they, what are they, and now we're here, and unfortunately, it's not an exaggeration to say that in its own way, this movie did save my life, and that's in the very literal way, sure, and you can take whatever you want from that mental health statement that you will, but it's also in the I run now in trans spaces in Hollywood, and I see a lot of very exhausted trans creators and actors, and they are oftentimes not as kind to themselves and kind to each other as they could be, because they're being taught that there's only one role in the movie for them. There's only one space in the writer's room for them. And there's certainly no areas of leadership, like Shiv inhabited, for them at all. And that is terrifying. And of course they're in a bit of a bad mood. I felt that fear very deeply, and I was beginning to lose hope that Hollywood and my community in LA and my personal life would ever reflect this mysterious trans joy that everybody said I would feel eventually. So this
You
movie,
didn't feel it at the first shot?
I'm sorry, what? This movie did, in many different forms, save my life, and I'm very grateful for my personal opportunity, but I now understand the necessity of having a wealth of trans and queer people on screen doing a variety of different things, so that my brain, anybody's brain that's watching these films, can see so many different versions of what joy, happiness, and transness look like, because we can only believe what we consume. That's how humans are built. Our brains are shockingly simple. I think that this movie speaks to that level of importance, and it certainly did for me personally. But I hate to be say the rote thing, but there needs to be more movies like this. People's lives quite literally do depend on it. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just to echo what they've already said, but also it was so, there's a scene in the film where, and obviously Misha had to go through a much more intense version of this in terms of having to detransition for this character for the first half of the movie, but there is a point in it where I'm trying on some dresses, and so that was like one of the first conversations that Shiv and I had when I got on board, because when I read it, I was like, oh, this is going to be something to think about, right? And obviously, like, from the jump, literally one of the first things Shiv said to me on the call was like, what do you feel about that? How's it gonna, this is how it's gonna go. We're always gonna have space on set. If you need to take a minute, like, that is a priority. It's built into the schedule. And it's like, you're just not getting that if you don't have a trans director. You're just not. Like, cis people are not gonna think about that kind of thing. Even, it would be up to me to, put my own sort of thing in place to deal with that, right? It's not gonna be the type of thing where the production has my back. And then, to then get to our first costume fitting, and our costume designer is also trans. And it's like, all right, like, I'm gonna be covered on every possible base that I could be. And like, just to know that I can just then think about my performance and what I actually have been hired to do, and not have to think about all this other stuff, because I know there are people on set who have my back. Like, it's just not something you're gonna get on most sets. And I think it's why it's really important, and why this movie is as successful as it is, and why it worked so well, is because we all were able to, like, obviously these conversations were still things we had to have with ourselves, but at the same time, we knew it wasn't just us against the world trying to make this movie, right? And so, also, I think, like, for me, and like from bringing, some of the more comedic elements and stuff, I just, like, know that I would have been more nervous to go there on certain things if I'm surrounded by all these, like, straight cis people who are, like, maybe gonna be, like, I don't know, judging me in some way, or I don't know, if my voice cracks or something, they're gonna, like, I don't know, like, then I'm nervous, like, and I don't have to be if I'm around all these other, like, cool trans and queer people. So, like, I think it just allowed for our performances to go there as well, and then also, of course, for Misha, and for some of the more intense moments, like, I don't know, you don't really want to be doing that in front of people you don't feel comfortable in front of. So, like, to know that, like, the set was gonna always prioritize making sure that we were good on everything, just always, like, made me comfortable going in every day knowing, like, all right, all I have to focus on is, like, again, saying the dick joke the best way I can, and, like, doing my thing. But, sorry, was this supposed to be PG? Anyway, the other thing I was just thinking as well, just in terms of, like, having, trans people both on screen but behind the scenes as well, I think is just so cool and vital, because, like, obviously there's plenty of trans kids out there, and maybe 1% of them want to be actors or want to be on stage, but, like, there's probably a lot who would love to get involved in a community like film and television that has a lot of opportunity for creativity in so many different ways. And, like, to know that there's, like, oh, there's all these really cool trans people doing grip and electric and costume and camera and all this other amazing stuff that goes into building film, I think is also really important, because I think trans kids just need more ways to see a future, and not every one of them is going to want to be on screen. So like there needs to be ways to see that there's other ways to get into something like film that I think can be a really great place for queer people and people who need that kind of community that the arts naturally bring. So I think it's just one of the many cool things that came out of this project.
Very well said, the three of you. Thank you. Something about this film that I personally really enjoy is that it's the first time that I've seen something that allows people outside of our community to laugh with us and not maybe at us, because the jokes are written by us for that specific reason. So speaking to the comedy, seems like a complicated tightrope, right? Trans and queer people have been the subject of many comedians who are not in our community as the butt of the joke, right? Nico, you are an amazing stand-up. Got to see you this week. Buddy's got chops. Can you expand on this and how it may be healing to use laughter as a bridge?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love doing stand-up for so many reasons, but one of the things that's been so cool for me over the last couple years is being able to go do my shows around the country and stuff, and getting to meet trans people that live in Austin or live in Indianapolis, and just like getting to be there with them in real time, and like talking about this and having them come up and be like, I've never been to a comedy show where this was talked about in a way that was like cool before. Like I've only ever, and like many trans people will be like, I don't like stand-up comedy because they're used to being the butt of the joke. And so that for me is like a personal mission of wanting to bring, like Siobhan was saying, like expanding who this, like these art forms that we love so much get to expand to include us as well. And I think like something I've realized too is like a lot of cis people really dig hearing about it, because I think what really is happening is like we all interact with gender, and we just are more aware of that than cis people are because we have to be. And I think when you kind of like trick cis people into thinking about gender, they realize, oh, this is actually quite interesting and kind of completely made up, and something we should think about. So it's been an interesting thing to like get to see people like sort of have that light bulb moment for themselves, even if they don't fully like really go into it with themselves, just to like to understand that. And I also think like there is a lot of stuff that's really funny about being trans, like there just is, and it's like when you're not saying it in poor faith and you're not making fun of us or saying something horrible, it is like there are a lot of funny things. And like I find that people tend to enjoy like if the audience knows I'm trans but the person in the story doesn't know yet, like there is something funny in that if we're like having a weird conversation where I'm trying to avoid saying that. And I don't know, so there's a lot of like situational humor that just comes naturally with having a sexy secret, and so I think that there's like a lot of really inherently funny things, and I think that's something our movie plays with a lot. Like gender bending, like we talked about at the beginning of this, is something that has been used in comedy forever. So it's just like, it's all about context, and it's all about like who's telling the joke, and especially I think in this current moment, it's extra important for people to be thinking about that. And I hope that more stand-ups who are outside of our community start to consider the way that the context of the world and the context of who they are intersects with the jokes that they're making. And I think it's just really punk rock that we got to like make something that's all by trans people, and equally, if not more, definitely more funny than anything they're doing. So I mean, their First Amendment rights to say bad jokes are fair. But anyway.
Okay, thank you. Final question, and this goes to the three of you. What to each of you does the future of trans cinema look like to you, and how do we keep pushing the art form forward?
I mean, I think,
Do you want mine?
yeah, mine ran out of battery.
I think that in general, the future of trans cinema, I mean, I'm sure that, I know, Misha, we've talked about this, and we've talked about this in PR, and so I'm not gonna step on it too much. But the future of trans cinema does mean trans people making art. Like, it means all kinds of trans people making art. It means trans people making any kind of art that they possibly can. That can expand to include any genre. I mean, I know that in making this, it was complicated for me to step into making a comedy. I mean, a lot of what you were just talking about, Nico, like, it is a difficult tightrope, and it is hard to engage with the reality of your own identity and your own existence and then make jokes about it when those jokes traditionally have always been used to hurt us and hurt our community. But I think that there is something really interesting and something really exciting about the future of an art form that is going against the grain of culture. Like comedy, new comedy since the 60s was historically incredibly punk rock and very subversive. And it isn't that subversive to punch down on people. Back then, people were referencing themselves and referencing their own lived experiences, and people were breaking the mold. But we have reached a point now where a lot of comedies are kind of exclusively punching down on communities that have been targeted by society, and that's a super easy choice to make, and it's a really boring choice to make if you were an artist. And so it's a lot more interesting if you are a trans artist who is coming up like you. I mean, you have a great set that is entirely speaking about your own experience. That's an amazing thing to watch, and it's so fucking funny. I think any trans person can just look to their own lived experience and make incredible art, because we are living inherently in very interesting lives, and lives that have an incredible amount of depth. And that's not to say that anyone else doesn't have that depth, but other people aren't going to be able to speak to the depth that we have and we hold in ourselves. And so I think any artists who are coming up, especially within film, which does tend to be an art form that has a wider reach or a longer reach towards people who live places that may not get live media. They might not get live shows, they might not get live music, they might not get things where they can see people in person. Film works so well to reach into those corners of the world. And as trans people make more art, we can reach deeper into those inaccessible places. And I think not only, obviously, as we've alluded to before, save certain people's lives, I also think, like you were saying, Nico, there are a lot of people who are interested about this. And God knows, some of them might just be antagonistic towards us because they feel that they don't know enough, or they feel excluded from the conversation, like they'll never know enough. No one wants to feel stupid. And so as we make art, it isn't our job to educate people. But if we can accidentally educate people just through speaking our truth, that's gonna make a huge difference.
No, you go.
Misha wants the last word.
Yes,
No, I
you
don't.
got it.
I'm nervous.
Whatever. I think that to echo what you said, I think the future of trans cinema is about just allowing for there to be a breadth of trans stories, not just one type of trans story. I know we've seen a lot of the sort of very tragic, very sad types of stories, which is why I think this movie is going to be so incredibly refreshing and surprising to people, because it's very funny and still has that heartfelt core to it that is inherent in a story that is made by coming from a well of empathy and lived experience. And but I think just allowing for there to be a breadth of trans stories, and allowing for, I think independent film is going to be a really important place for our stories. And I think money talks. I think that's where a lot of people who want to be helping the trans community can really put their money where their mouth is, and help fund these types of things, because the reality is that the difference between our community and a lot of others is access to wealth and to resources. And it's expensive to make a movie. If has anybody said this before? It's expensive to make a movie. So I think that just really finding ways to support and allow us to have the agency to work outside traditional systems that are not going to be ready for us maybe in the next 5 years, who knows, so having that agency to be able to go outside traditional things like we did with this film, and finding, because they're not, if you go through a studio system, they're not letting you have all trans people in the cast and crew. It's not happening. So I think unless we are able to circumvent these things and use our community and our resources, I think that's really where it's gonna help us, because also with independent film, there's a freedom to actually go there with what you want to be talking about, and having less of that oversight of oh, this is too trans or not trans enough, or whatever that even means. So I think our film is just perfectly trans. So
Goldilocks trans?
yes, Goldilocks trans. Goldie she, Goldie they, whatever.
Goldie they.
Goldie they.
That's wonderful. My notes aren't serving me because they're kind of basic. I have something written here about what playing it safe enough to get something made in a studio system way versus what being willing to go on the edge and say the thing, do the thing, make the art that really matters. And I realized that conservatives are absolutely not playing it safe. When they're punching down at us, they're saying exactly what they think of us, and most of it is due to a lack of knowledge. I think, quite frankly, I've been even meeting people here in Austin, and one thing I heard, which I haven't heard in a while because I haven't been outside of New York or LA except for work in a while, was somebody said to me they know somebody who's never met a gay person, never met a queer person, never met a trans person. I was like, oh right, that's a lot of America. So if they're not going to play it safe, then neither should we. And that's not to say we shouldn't play it smart. We should. This film was real blood, real sweat, real tears when it comes to making a trans movie. But I don't think we should be compromising the messaging of our art, which is not, by the way, inherently political. It's inherently identity-based. It's us talking about the fact that we exist, and it can be very funny, and it can also be very sad, and it can be everything in between because we are fully fleshed out human beings. But if I'm going to say anything that makes even a remote amount of sense or an impact at this thing, it's that I don't think that trans people and queer people should be playing it safe with the kind of art that we make, but we should be playing it smart. So build laterally, gather your trans and queer cohorts, crew, community, exactly like we did. We reached for every single person that was capable of helping us and being on set with us in LA, and that's how we made this film happen. But no, I guess it's not the time to play it safe and studio system it up. It is the time to make indie films and make the content that genuinely reflects the art uncompromisingly that we want to make.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Circling back to what you had said earlier, is I think a lot of the times the industry makes us feel like there is only enough space for one of us, or two, max three. But it's not true. It's not true. And the more that they continue to tell you that, the more that you just wake up every day and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say,
And I think also just like supporting other trans artists, trans creators is like super, super important. You know, like obviously we've made some incredible friends on this set, and I'm very grateful, very, very, very grateful for that. And it just makes me excited because it's like I know that I will have people in my circle now that I can like look to hopefully future projects and casting and crews and things like that. It's like it's so important to make those connections, like Misha said, laterally. I think a lot of times, especially in the industry, we think about going vertically. And those connections are never as fruitful as the lateral connections, and that's where you make real art and real stuff happen. So I think, to Jordan's point, like if we remind each other and ourselves that there is not just room for one of us, and we actually can create those situations for each other, that's how we break out of that as well and ship. Because like I've been saying, they're not going to do it for us. We have to go show them.
100%. Well, I love the three of you so much. And
Love
thank you
them.
for allowing me to share this space with you and your words. I think we have some time if anybody who's brave and wants to step up to that mic. Yes!
Do it.
Ready.
I've yet to see your film yet, but given that I think the extent of my trans film knowledge is Tu Wong Fu, I'm really excited to have an update on that. Coming from the perspective of like a cishet, white presenting male producer, I have a question about just allyship and like what are you looking for when you're looking like at those vertical integration? Like how are you reaching out to people? Like how are you presenting yourself? Like what would be the best way to like approach possibly like marginalized, threatened trans filmmaker and be like, hey, how can I support you get this story made?
I mean, we need people in positions of power to reach back down and be willing to help us. That's always, 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 always necessary. I do think that it's towing a difficult line though, because you don't want to tokenize people by reaching out to find the marginalized community just to find a story or a voice that feels new or feels exciting. And I think that a lot of it really does come down to how genuinely you want to engage with the topic you are hoping to make. I mean, I know that, what Nico and Misha were talking about, and a big part of what we were trying to create on this set was safety, and that inherent safety that just comes from lived experience. When you've had to live through and advocate for yourself to make those safeties and make those spaces, you're gonna know what to do. But if you are coming into a space where that's not gonna come naturally to you. That's not gonna be inherent to your lived experience. You're gonna know all the things to pick. It is hard because it requires a conversation with that person where you make space for them to acknowledge the things that are difficult for them. But it's also hard to enter into a conversation with someone and go, hey, what are the scariest things that are happening? What's the worst stuff that could possibly happen to you on this thing? Da, 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 da. I mean, it's, you know, it is everything. On film sets, it can be everything. It is hair and makeup. It is clothing. Sometimes, depending on where you're shooting, it comes down to who is getting your talent from the hotel to the set. Like, who is that driver in the car? How much can you trust that driver? How well do you know them? What neighborhoods are you shooting in? When you're looking at locations, what does that location look like? What is the safety that's inherent on that location? There's so much of that. And I think that in those conversations, there needs to be a balance of protecting the mental health of the person that you are working with, especially if you are reaching out to them and you are working with someone that you've never known before. You do want to coddle them and make space for them to be an artist, like Nico was saying. You know, when you do have all of those protections in place, it does become very easy to just do your art. But, you know, we are being threatened, and there's plenty of people in this world who still need to make art under those circumstances. And despite how lovely it was to be on this set, you know, while we were making this movie over the summer, and we were gearing into this presidential election, that every week it was something new. Every week there was some new thing, and that is a crazy pressure. That was a crazy pressure for us to make this thing. So there's always going to be something coming from the world. There's always going to be something coming from the world that's going to press down on marginalized groups. And as much as you can make space for people to voice those fears or to voice what they need, that's always going to help you, and that's always going to make things better, and is just gonna catch those things before I think they would become a problem or they would come up. But like, also, let your brain snowball. I think a lot of us have like horrible anxiety, honestly. I think a lot of trans people have developed horrible fucking anxiety because we have to think about every possible scenario that could harm us. And if you, not that you should develop horrible anxiety, but I think a lot of us have that, if you can let your brain snowball a little bit, you know, if you are thinking about all the things that can go wrong, if you let yourself access that part of your brain that might engage or acknowledge those things, or even with your overlapped experience, you know, like intersectionality is a real thing. If there's things that you've seen harm you, that's probably gonna harm someone else tenfold if they're being more marginalized by the world. And so take that thing, spin that out, and as a producer, you know, you always wanna protect your artists. So just let yourself think of every single thing that could possibly go wrong so you can at least protect them, you know, and try to save yourself while you're at it.
Definitely. I think also, like, you know, trusting trans artists that we know what we're doing and that we're able to we know the story we're trying to tell and what needs to go into something like that. I think like my most fruitful, you know, relationships with people on the producing side have been when they really want to uplift my vision and my voice, and they're just there to help make that happen. And I think it's especially important with marginalized voices, you know, because so often we're already in our heads about like, oh, is this gonna come off wrong, or is this not understandable, or is it not relatable, or this or that. And I think, you know, we don't need more people to be that are on our team doing that too, because we're probably gonna do it to ourselves. Like, obviously, like, there's a balance to be struck about finding, you know, what makes a movie and all that good stuff. But at the same time, I think it's really important to feel that, especially like if there are cis and straight people on board on the team, that they're just as trusting of the trans creators as you know, we are of each other and of ourselves.
I actually am really happy that we have all three different answers for you. Like, Hollywood is a really difficult place, as we know, to succeed. It's just a numbers game. It doesn't matter if you're trans or what. In that particular argument, it's very difficult to succeed in Hollywood. So if somebody's putting in the work, and if somebody has gone to school for acting, has done their time as a stand-up comedian, has worked their way from acting into a writer's room, like, if they have the skill set, the resume, the script, and the credentials, trust them, but also treat them like a professional. And if you're at a coffee, because you're a producer, so you do that most of the day, I would imagine. If you're at a coffee, no, interrupt me.
IEP, so.
Oh, great. If you're at a meeting, if you're doing what a lot of producers do, which is talk up the talent that they want to produce their work of, talk them up like they're a professional. And it's the build laterally thing, but it's also, you know, we are working professionals, and we are striving to be even more successful professionals. So treat us like the hardworking professionals that we want to be and are. Because that way, at the end of that meeting, if you're trying to get somebody to sign on to a movie, they've heard you talk not just about the fact that we are trans or the fact that we are queer, but the fact that we work hard and create excellent work. So that's
worthy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, thank you so much for bringing attention to representation on set. Like, it's so underappreciated and it's really necessary. So thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Hello. As someone looking to cast and find crew for feature films, how did you find your wonderful cast and your crew?
I mean, casting this movie and crewing this movie were two very different pursuits. The casting of the movie was insane. It is really hard to find this many trans people who fit the roles you're trying to have in a movie, because like we are still making a movie, we still do have to find the right actors who are gonna do the movie justice. I mean, every single person in this movie, there's a couple people here from the movie, every person in this movie was found differently. Some of them, I mean, like Jordan right here is the reason that Misha's in the movie, because Jordan and Misha auditioned for the same part, I think.
Which should have never happened.
Which is insane that happened in the first place. Like, yeah, they're bizarre.
The clown.
An agender king, queen.
We'll take anyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, you know, Nico, I knew Nico from the internet. And the fact that Nico ended up in this movie was an insane godsend to me, but it was really kismet. It was really happenstance that I was able to find you. I mean, like, he's fucking incredible in the movie, but there's not a lot of people right now who are getting to do comedy, and I think a lot of people in general in trans spaces are wary of people trying to take advantage of us. And it was lucky that I was a trans person reaching out to trans people, so I, you know, had a degree of a pedigree that I could at least foreground with. But, you know, that's its own thing. I mean, Emmett, who's right here, was found through a friend of mine, Ian Alexander, and Emmett's fucking amazing in the movie as well. It's crazy that I get to have two T-boys playing cis dudes in this thing. That's so insane. And I got the right ones, and so I think a lot of it was luck, and I hate to say that, like, I got really lucky, but I did. That being said, that luck was built on the back of a lot of years of community building before it. The only reason that I knew of Jordan was because Vic, one of the producers on the movie and one of my very dear friends, knew Jordan through community. I knew Ian Alexander, who got me to Emmett, is another friend of mine who got me there. So much of this was a lot of that groundwork that it built community, so that when I needed to ask for the connections, or I needed to ask for recommendations that got us this movie, I could do that. And I think that, you know, it's something that we keep talking about, but Hollywood is not gonna let us do this all of the time, and it's going to rely on our willingness to build community and really, really, really genuinely support one another. So many of the crew members are my personal friends, and I hold very dearly, and I, you know, have showed up for, and they have showed up for me in my real life. I was a cinematographer for a number of years before I made this movie, and was hiring, you know, a trans crew on music videos for, you know, big, like, cis girly pop artists, and that was a bizarre experience, and it always was. And it sometimes was really hard because, you know, sometimes you're going up against people who do not want you to grow up like that and do not want you to work like that, and you do need to fight for that, and you kind of need to be willing to shoot yourself in the foot for it too. Like, I'm sure that if I was willing to fold over for a lot of the positions of power, it might make my life easier, and it might make my time making things easier. But if you really believe in this stuff, you gotta put your sweat equity into it. You need to be willing to have your life be made more difficult in order to make the thing happen. The amount of stress that went into getting this thing to happen was unreal. I cannot overstate it. It is unbelievable.
But I do want to, because the question is how, right? And like
Yes.
I've noticed this about the level of stress that our higher ups went through to make this movie. And this is also my way of shouting out in our, you know, Malia, Tachi, Emmett, who are here from the movie. These are all wonderful queer cast members that we have. Finding them, finding us, y'all finding your entire crew. It's a bizarre skill that I noticed these folks have, which was patience under duress. So if they needed, Nico was cast less than a week before we started filming. Like, that it's such a leap of faith that we all, but it's such a leap of faith that they went through to make this movie, obviously, but it was patience and listening. So in this case, it was my manager that knew of Nico, and we all knew Nico from the internet, and we got to connect that way, and that happened. So we listened to each other, and we all worked together. We all took on the stress of this movie, and we realized we were obviously under a time crunch, under a money crunch, under an everything crunch. But that doesn't mean that you can speed up and make bigger and bigger mistakes to try to fix the problem. And we did not have money to throw at the problem, which is how Hollywood typically fixes problems. So it's patience and listening under duress, in addition to community building, and that does take time, years, and effort.
Yeah, just to add to both of those, I think also anything in creativity and in art is unfortunately the lame answer is it's a daily practice and it's a daily pursuit, and you have to commit to that every single day. And you can't decide 2 days before you start casting that, oh shit, we should probably have an all trans casting crew. That's not gonna work, right? You have to commit to community building. Even if you don't know the seeds you're planting are gonna bloom these flowers, you have to start planting the seeds regardless. And so, because Shiv is a wonderful person who is so beloved in our community and has all these connections, we were able to make this film. And that obviously this movie was a brainchild of Shiv, and it comes so clearly from their everything. But that extends to the casting, that extends to the community that was created for this film. So had Shiv decided when they put pen to paper that was, it probably wouldn't have still been enough time, right? It was because they've been doing this for so long. So I think just committing to finding ways to have community mixers and getting people to meet each other, and one trans person in this film and another in this, can you get them together, because then they know each other, and now a whole polycule shows up. We got
That's true.
That's
Also,
how we
that
figure
is
it out.
true.
You can get them for a reduced rate if it's a polycule.
Yeah,
That's how we make trans.
3 for 1.
But in all seriousness, I think finding those moments for community, even if you don't know what project it's going to go to yet, it will find its way eventually, and just having that patience, like Misha said.
And also, don't be afraid, like we said with the first question, to talk each other up. You have to build laterally. I made this mistake over and over again when I first started in Hollywood, because we all want to win an Oscar tomorrow. Build laterally, but also be willing to talk other people up, especially if they are really doing good work, because that encourages them to do what? Talk you up, and before you know it, you're all on a set together. I wish somebody just drilled that into my head when I first started, but yeah.
Also, segue, but the very literal way to these beautiful answers is, I've noticed some casting directors in Hollywood, whether they are cis or not, do keep a list of queer and trans actors, and I don't know their names off the top of my head. I probably should.
Actually, I know a couple if you want to find me after.
So if you are looking for specifically a trans actor, or I don't know if they keep track, I'm sure they don't keep track of crew, but
Yeah, crew is a harder one.
they do have those lists and resources for y'all.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
I don't actually have a question, but I just want to help with the answer. IMDb. If you look at this cast and crew, the movie is beautiful. It doesn't matter who made it. And there you can hire 3 crew on your next job, or you can hire 3 talent on your next job. And if you go to IMDb and you look up any other queer or trans film, most likely there's already diversity behind and in front of the camera, because they're already doing it. So, I produced Potato Dreams of America that played here in 2021. Over 75% of our keys were immigrants and LGBTQ+. So they're already there. So look at the people that have done it before you, and then also ask them, because they'll have recommendations for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I apologize if this was already mentioned when I was late. You can shut me down if so. But I'm just curious if y'all can speak to when you're sort of an other and you're trying to pursue a career in entertainment and media, as a queer performer myself, how do you deal with the fact that you have sort of 2 sides of this dream that you want to accomplish, but then also you're sort of de facto de facto spokesperson for this identity that you have, and the fact that the dream doesn't always include maybe roles where you're playing a trans person, but you also want to honor that identity, and just how do you balance those 2 sides of your career?
I have a really inherently bitchy answer that I think is really useful. As a performer, my answer is actually don't compromise. Don't cut your hair short if you want it long. Don't roll back on the makeup if makeup is a big part of your personality. Don't compromise, because you will inherently create watered down work as a performer. Somebody who embodies whatever cis-normative thing you were trying to play will probably do it better because that's their lived experience. And casting directors look at hundreds, if not thousands, of tapes. So if you are going to stand out for being who you actually are, and don't compromise, and do the work to find yourself early if you can, so that every audition you are bringing that incredibly unique self, and as a queer person it will be inherently a bit more unique. Again, advice I wish I'd gotten earlier on when I was auditioning for cis boy roles. As a creator, as a writer, as a producer, I would actually say the bitchy but really fun answer at the same time is do it yourself. Make your own work. Do what Shiv did with this movie. Do what Nico's doing with his stand-up. I wrote and sold an entire show about trans and queer trauma, dumping, this, that, and the other. It didn't get to a streamer, but it got me my first staff writing job on a Netflix show that existed about a similar topic. Do it yourself, because that's how you plant those seeds that Nico's talking about. And I only say it's a bitchy answer because it's unfortunate. The system is not built for us, but systems come from somewhere, and it comes from people willing to pick up Save the Cat, or actually I have better recommendations for you afterwards if you want to hear those. Anatomy of Story, do it, read it. But do it yourself and get excited, curious, and joyful about doing it yourself, even if it's difficult, because that's how you create work that will stand out and get you more work after that, but also be true to people.
Yeah, I also think, I think we all feel the pressure, from the first part of your question about having to, be a voice for our community at all the time, and, and I think that's something I get into my head a lot about, and I have my wonderful girlfriend and other people in my life who are really great about reminding me that just being myself is doing a lot, especially right now. Like, just being out there as a queer person, as a trans person, playing a cis guy in this movie, even though my dialogue can be reprehensible at times, is a radical thing to be doing, and that is going to do a lot of work. So even though I'm not actively saying anything about being a trans person in this movie itself, aside from whatever, people will find the movie, they will know, they'll find out that I'm trans or whatever, and I think that will, and then that might open some doors for younger kids who hadn't thought about it before, or whatever. But I think that obviously we have to be vocal, and we have to stick up for each other, and we have to especially I'm white, thinking about what that means for my place in the community, and how I can be helping queer people of color and other more marginalized, and obviously as a trans man, thinking about trans women and children, first and foremost, and then myself. And so I think obviously really important to be thinking about those things, but by the nature of your question, you already are. And so just remind yourself, be kind to yourself, you showing up and being you, even as if you're on a straight cis set doing a straight cis role, playing a doctor or something, you're still there as a queer person, and you still somebody will look up IMDb and oh my god, that person's queer, that's amazing, that's cool. It'll have impact in ways that you might not ever see, but by being you, you're doing the thing that you need to be doing.
Real.
I mean, I only have to echo the two of them. I think that sums it up more than anything. I worried a lot about, making this movie and having it be the monolithic voice for fucking trans identity or whatever. The reality is that we are finally lucky enough also to live in a world where the internet exists, and there's a lot of trans people talking about what it means to be trans. There's a lot of queer people talking about what it means to be queer. None of us, thankfully, are a monolith anymore, and none of us have to be that monolith anymore. It is so prolific that they're trying to get rid of all of us. So I don't think you have, it is just, that's the thing, you don't have to worry about ever representing the whole community, because we all are doing it every day. We're all showing up, we're all living every day, we're breathing every day, we're doing that work every day. It is what Nico said, be kind to yourself, have space, leave space for yourself, and just be yourself, like Misha said. That is it. That is the entire thing. That is what keeps us all here.
Anybody else?
I think we gotta go.
All right. We gotta go.
We actually have to go. Yeah, we're out of time.